What kind of life survives when the people in power try to erase it? That is the question behind Pope Leo XIV's decision to authorize new decrees in the causes of saints. At first glance, the announcement looks like a list of names: 20 priests from Ibiza and Formentera, a 17th-century mystic from Majorca, a Dominican nun from Italy, an American foundress, a Belgian missionary in Brazil, and an Italian woman who sheltered Jews during the Second World War. But the Church does not place these names before the world as decoration. She places them there as evidence. Some were killed because hatred of the faith had become strong enough to hunt priests. Others spent long lives in prayer, classrooms, sick rooms, monasteries, missions, neighborhoods, and dangerous acts of charity. They did not all face the same enemy. They did not all live in the same century. They did not all serve in the same way. Yet the Church saw the same pattern running through them. Holiness does not need control of history in order to outlast it. The youngest martyr on Ibiza would become part of that answer. Before the Church declares someone blessed, she first asks what kind of witness has been left behind. That is why this announcement matters. Pope Leo XIV authorized the dicastery for the causes of saints to promulgate decrees, and that language can sound technical. But inside the Church, these decrees are never just paperwork. They are the formal judgment that certain lives, after careful investigation, reveal something reliable about fidelity to Christ. The first group is different from the others because the Church recognized martyrdom. 20 diocesan priests from the Spanish islands of Ibiza and Formentera were killed in hatred of the faith during the Spanish Civil War. That phrase, hatred of the faith, is precise. It means the Church is not simply saying these men died during political violence. She is saying their deaths were tied directly to hostility toward their Catholic identity and priestly witness. That distinction matters because martyrdom has always held a special place in Christian memory. From the first centuries of the Church, martyrs were not remembered as people who lost. They were remembered as witnesses who remained faithful when the cost became absolute. Their persecutors could take their lives, but they could not make their witness disappear. The 5 other figures were not recognized as martyrs. Pope Leo recognized their heroic virtues, and they are now declared venerable. That title means the Church has judged that their lives showed Christian virtue in an extraordinary and consistent way. It does not mean their causes are finished. It means the Church is saying there is something in their faith, charity, prayer, obedience, courage, missionary zeal, or service that deserves serious attention from the whole people of God. The approval came during an audience with Cardinal Marcello Semeraro, the prefect of the dicastery for the causes of saints. That office exists because sainthood is not handled casually. The Church studies documents, testimony, reputation for holiness, historical context, and the spiritual meaning of a life before she speaks publicly in this way. Holiness is not a mood. It is examined. That is especially important in a story like this because these lives stretch across different countries, centuries, and vocations. Mother Clara Andreu y Malferit belonged to the world of 17th-century Majorca, monastic prayer, and mystical experience. Sister Maria Petra Giordano belonged to Dominican life in Italy, formation, gospel living, and religious leadership. Mother Maria Teresa Tallon belonged to the Catholic immigrant world of New York, teaching, care for the sick, and missionary presence in ordinary homes and neighborhoods. Father Giulio Emilio Alberto de Lomberde carried the missionary impulse from Belgium to Brazil, especially into remote regions of the Amazon. Mother Maria Agnese Tribioli carried charity into danger during the Second World War, even sheltering Jews when that kind of mercy could bring consequences. These are not interchangeable stories. They show that holiness does not have one social class, one geography, one century, or one temperament. That is the key to the whole announcement. The Church was not presenting one model of holiness repeated 6 times. She was showing several ways grace can become visible. In martyrdom, in monastic obedience, in religious formation, in education, in missionary endurance, in care for the sick, in service to the poor, and in courage when human life is threatened. The story begins on two Mediterranean islands where faith itself became a target. The story begins on Ibiza and Formentera, two Mediterranean islands where the Church did not first face persecution as an idea, but as a direct assault on priests, worship, and Catholic memory. The 20 diocesan priests recognized by Pope Leo were killed between August and September of 1936 during the anti-religious persecution that accompanied the Spanish Civil War. They were led by Juan Torres Torres, and together they represented nearly half of the local clergy on Ibiza. That number is staggering because it means this was not a marginal attack. It cut into the living structure of the local church. The pressure had already been building before the killings. Restrictions on religious worship had become serious enough that the diocese suspended public processions for security reasons. A procession is never just movement through the streets. It is the Church praying publicly, carrying faith into common space, letting a town or island see that Catholic worship is part of its shared life. When processions have to stop for safety, something deeper has already broken. Then the persecution intensified. The article names acts of violence and desecration and says the goal was to eradicate the Catholic identity of the islands. That is the key. This was not only about removing certain priests, it was about trying to make Catholic life disappear from public memory, public worship, and local identity. Among the martyrs, Juan Torres Torres was the youngest. He was remembered for humility and generosity, which makes his death even more revealing. The Church is not saying he was important because he had worldly power. She is saying his witness mattered because the hatred directed at him could not erase the kind of priest he had become. The memory of these martyrs remained alive within the local church for decades. That matters because persecution often tries to control not only bodies, but memory. It wants later generations to forget who suffered, why they suffered, and what their faith cost. Beatification is the Church's answer to that attempt. It says the names still matter. The first of the new venerables takes the story back much earlier, to Majorca in the year 1596, when Mother Clara Andreu y Malferit was born. She entered the monastery of St. Bartholomew in Inca at a young age and spent her life in prayer and service. Her holiness was marked by profound mystical experiences, but the article points to something just as important. When church authorities examined those experiences, she responded with obedience and humility. That detail matters because Catholic mysticism is never measured only by intensity. The Church asks whether extraordinary experiences produce deeper humility, deeper obedience, deeper charity, and deeper union with God. Mother Clara's reputation for holiness endured, and the monastery connected with her life remains a place of pilgrimage. Her witness was not loud, but it kept drawing people. Sister Maria Petra Giordano's path was different. Born in Naples in 1912 and later raised in Rome, she discerned her vocation at the Basilica of Santa Maria sopra Minerva before entering the Dominican monastery of Santa Maria del Sasso in Tuscany. Her life unfolded inside the Dominican tradition, where prayer, truth, study, and preaching are never meant to be separated. She was appointed novice mistress at a young age and later elected prioress. That means her holiness was tested not only in private devotion, but in responsibility for forming other religious sisters. She dedicated her life to gospel living and formation, and because she died in 2006, her cause benefits from numerous eyewitness testimonies. People who knew her could still speak directly about the shape of her life. Mother Maria Teresa Tallon brings the story to the United States. She was born in New York State in 1867, to Irish immigrant parents, and felt called to consecrate her life to God from an early age. After joining the Sisters of the Holy Cross, she served as a teacher and cared for the sick. During an epidemic in San Francisco, she contracted diphtheria while assisting patients. That single detail reveals the seriousness of her charity. She did not serve the sick from a safe distance. She entered the danger close enough for the illness to touch her own body. Later, while serving in Manhattan in 1908, she founded the Parish Visitors of Mary Immaculate, imagining a community of women who would bring Christ's presence into homes and neighborhoods. That vision matters because it treated the parish not as a building people enter once a week, but as a mission field extending into apartments, streets, families, and hidden needs. Her life remained centered on God, education, and care for those most in need. She saw holiness in visitation. Father Giulio Emilio Alberto de Lombaergi carried the story across the Atlantic. Born in Belgium in 1878, he belonged to the missionaries of the Holy Family and later founded 3 religious congregations. After receiving missionary formation with the missionaries of Our Lady of Africa, he was sent to Brazil in 1912. His mission was not comfortable. He dedicated himself to pastoral ministry, education, and catechesis, especially in remote regions of the Amazon. That means he served where distance itself could become a hardship, where forming Christian communities required perseverance, and where the church had to reach people beyond the easy centers of power and culture. He became a Brazilian citizen in 1941 and often expressed deep affection for the country he had made his home. That detail matters because missionary life, at its best, is not spiritual tourism. It becomes love for a people. He died in a car accident on Christmas Eve in 1944, and his life was remembered for apostolic zeal, perseverance in prayer, and unwavering trust in God. The final venerable, Mother Maria Agnese Tribioli, brings together suffering, religious foundation, Franciscan simplicity, and dangerous charity. Born in Florence in 1879, she overcame a difficult childhood before embracing religious life. She later founded the Congregation of the Pious Workers of St. Joseph in the Diocese of Imola. During the Second World War, she promoted numerous charitable initiatives, including sheltering a group of Jews despite the dangers involved. That act cannot be treated as a decorative footnote. It placed charity against a machinery of death. Later, she was recognized as righteous among the nations for that courageous witness. Inspired by the simplicity and poverty of St. Francis of Assisi, she dedicated her life to serving those in need. She died in 1965, at the age of 85. Her story shows that heroic virtue is not only found in convent prayer or institutional founding, though she knew both. It can also appear when a person chooses the endangered neighbor over personal safety. Taken together, these decrees form a map of Catholic holiness. Priests killed because they were priests. A mystic whose obedience guarded her experiences. A Dominican prioress who formed others in the gospel. An American foundress who brought Christ into homes and sick rooms. A missionary who gave his life to Brazil and the Amazon. An Italian foundress who sheltered Jews when charity was dangerous. Yet Leo's decision was about more than honoring the past. Religious hatred rarely begins by calling itself hatred. It often begins by treating faith as backward, public worship as a threat, priests as obstacles, religious women as useless, charity as weakness, and the Church's memory as something that should be pushed out of sight. That is why these decrees still matter. Pope Leo was not simply approving names for a Catholic calendar. He was placing before the Church a set of lives that expose what every age wants to hide. The martyrs of Ibiza and Formentera show what happens when hostility to the faith becomes organized enough to attack worship itself. Once public processions had to be suspended for security reasons, the local church was already being squeezed out of visible life. Then violence and desecration followed. Then priests were killed. The pattern is old, but it is not gone. A society does not have to begin with bloodshed in order to begin pushing faith towards silence. That is the first warning. The 5 new venerables reveal another side of the same truth. Most Christians will not be called to martyrdom, but every Christian is called to fidelity somewhere. Mother Clara shows fidelity in hidden prayer. mystical experience, humility, and obedience when the Church examined what had happened in her soul. Sister Maria Petra shows fidelity in religious formation, where holiness has to become patient enough to shape other lives. Mother Maria Teresa Tallon shows fidelity in education, sickness, and the homes and neighborhoods that polite society often overlooks. Father de Lomberde shows fidelity in mission, not as a romantic adventure, but as perseverance in pastoral work, catechesis, and education in remote places. Mother Maria Agnese Tribioli shows fidelity when charity becomes dangerous, when sheltering Jews is not simply kind, but costly. These lives make holiness harder to dismiss because they do not fit one narrow image. They appear in monasteries, epidemics, classrooms, Amazon missions, immigrant families, wartime hiding places, and islands marked by persecution. That matters now because the Church lives in a world that often wants witness without sacrifice. People admire compassion as long as it does not demand risk. They admire spirituality as long as it does not require obedience. They admire service as long as it does not challenge comfort. But the saints and blesseds of the Church keep saying something less convenient. Love becomes real when it takes the shape of a life. There is also a deeper challenge here for Catholics themselves. The Church does not remember martyrs so believers can feel superior to the world. She remembers them so believers can ask whether they would remain faithful under pressure. The Church does not name venerables, so their stories can become soft inspiration. She names them so ordinary Christians can see that heroic virtue is possible in real bodies, real places, real history, and real danger. Nothing in these decrees erases the pain behind them. The priests of Ibiza and Formentera still died. The persecution still tried to tear Catholic identity out of the islands. The epidemic still threatened the sick and those who cared for them. The Amazon mission was still hard. The Second World War still made mercy dangerous. Holiness does not make suffering unreal. It makes suffering unable to have the final word. The names announced in Rome carry a challenge as well as a memory. The world that tried to erase those priests did not get the last word. The war passed, the persecutors passed, the fear that emptied public processions passed. But the Church is still speaking the names of the 20 martyrs of Ibiza and Formentera, and she is still pointing to the mystic, the Dominican, the parish visitor, the missionary, and the rescuer of Jews as signs that holiness survives history by giving itself away. That is the answer hidden inside these decrees. Power can destroy bodies. It cannot make faithful witness meaningless. If this helped you understand what the Church is actually doing in the world, liking the video helps more people find this kind of Catholic coverage. Subscribe for more Catholic news, Vatican context, and stories from the living history of the Church. And tell me in the comments, do you agree that the memory of martyrs is one of the strongest answers the Church can give to persecution? The story continues, and so does the work.